Hey, what's up, guys? It's Rico, CEO of SourceLine Asia. I'm just hanging out in my office here. It's nighttime. I hope the lighting isn't too bad. It's really, really fucking hot right now. Anyways, without further ado, this video is about the top manufacturing hubs in China and, the differences between dealing with factories from the different hubs. So the reason why I'm making this video, let me just start off, is because recently I've been getting a lot of comments from you guys, and I try to reply to every single YouTube comment. I think I replied to every single YouTube comment. But what's interesting now is that we're getting comments where people are asking us to talk about specific subjects in videos. So recently I've been talking to this guy. His name is Kian. He's from Australia. He's a subscriber on the YouTube channel, and he's also listening to my podcast. And he made a request. He said, could you maybe do a video about the different China manufacturing hubs? And it makes sense because I think I've mentioned this a few times in videos before. I definitely mentioned in 5 days in Nantong, definitely mentioned it on the Made in China podcast a bunch of times. So there are different manufacturing hubs. And the video that I can think of that you should watch before you watch this is is it a factory or a trading company, part 1 and part 2, where I kind of discuss the importance of looking for hubs of like clusters of factories and why that's important in terms of making sure you're dealing direct with a manufacturer. So the way you can separate them is you can sort of look at it like there's North China, sort of Northeast China, sort of mainland, like the middle part of China, and then sort of Southern China. At the moment, the vast majority of manufacturers are in Southern China. So when we talk about Southern China specifically, we're talking about Guangdong province, right? So China has a bunch of different provinces. I can't name all of them off the top of my head, but Guangdong is one of the most prominent ones. That's where Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Dongguan, Huizhou, Foshan, these are like huge cities that tend to probably have, let's say 80% of the manufacturers in China are in those particular cities. And also most of the things that are being made in China are being made there. But at the same time, Guangdong is becoming more and more expensive as, the Chinese economy grows and the minimum wage goes up and the cost of living goes up. All of these things are factoring into the manufacturing costs. And right now, the main cities, and especially Guangdong, it being one of the older China manufacturing hubs, is the place where a lot of this development is happening, and like I said, all the costs of manufacturing are going up. So a lot of factories are now shifting either more inward or they go up north. So you find that northern factories tend to be slightly less professional in the sense that they're not as used to working with foreign clients. Like they're more used to working with local clients. So, for example, if you find a factory in Shenzhen, right, they might be very familiar with the AQL level procedure in terms of QC. I'm not going to go too deeply into that right now. If you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can listen to my podcast, Do Contracts Matter in China? It was episode 38 of the Made in China podcast. But the AQL level is just a general level inspection that you do when you're doing QC. So they might be familiar with that. They'll be like, oh yeah, okay, you guys are going to do an AQL level 2 inspection, great. If you talk to a factory up north, they might be like, wait, why are you guys doing QC? Like we usually just, we can do the QC for you. Like it's just, you're going to have to start explaining why you're doing QC. Oh, just trust us. Like we're trying to build a relationship with you. We're going to make the best quality product. And it's like, that's the way things used to be done. But the QC thing is not just because you don't trust the factory. It's also because it's good for both sides. Like if something goes wrong, that it's either the shipping process or it's the manufacturer or it's the warehouse because let's say you maybe the factory did an amazing job, you don't do QC, and then it ships to the warehouse, and the boxes are damaged, or they open up the boxes and some things are missing. But if you did the QC, you already know how the products were before they left the factory, right? So it's like it gives a clear point of who's responsible for what. So that's you have to end up explaining those kind of things to factories up north, even things like contracts. I know a lot of factories don't like to sign contracts in general, but again, southern China factories are more accustomed to contracts. They might have signed basic contracts in the past, and it might not be as difficult to explain to them, what is a sales agreement, and why are we signing a sales agreement, and why are we signing a non-disclosure agreement, things like that. So I find that the factories in North China, when I'm not just northern China, but also middle land China, if you want to call it that, they just are not as experienced with sort of the Western philosophies and the Western ways of doing business. That's sort of the main differences between the northern factories and the southern China factories. So the southern China factories, like I said, going to be more professional. It's also going to be a little bit more expensive to manufacture the products here, but the good thing about southern China is that there's so many suppliers. The vast majority, you can find anything here. Northern China is going to be a little bit more specific. So let's start to talk about the clusters, right? Actually, no, before I start to talk about the clusters, another thing is, like, if you're going to deal with northern China factories, it might be cheaper, but again, you're dealing with factories that you're going to have to do a lot of explaining. So if you're doing this by yourself, if you're doing it, you as a consumer in the US or Australia or Europe is talking directly to those factories, you have to weigh up, is it worth it for you? Would you rather pay an extra 10% or 15% or whatever that percentage is on your per unit cost and deal with a factory that's going to be easier to communicate with? So it's something that you have to weigh up yourself as a buyer. So in terms of the clusters, so there's Zhejiang province, which is northeast. Zhejiang is home to Hangzhou, very close to Shanghai. Shanghai is kind of like, it's weird, it's kind of its own province, if that makes sense. It's a city and it's also its own province. But Zhejiang is a huge cluster for manufacturers. Qingdao is another place. Jinhua, this is Qingdao. When you're talking about Qingdao, is like going into Nantong, that's the Jiangsu province. This is all northeast China. Qingdao's a little bit more west, but still northeast. And then when you're talking about southern China, we're talking about Guangzhou, Guangdong province is the main one. And then, again, in the north, it's like there's a combination of large provinces where there's a lot of manufacturers, but then there's also cities themselves like Shanghai. And by the way, with Shanghai, a lot of, again, because Shanghai is such a developed city, if you are talking to a supplier and they say they're in Shanghai, they're not actually in Shanghai. They're probably going to be in and around Shanghai, somewhere around the general vicinity, because it's just not realistic for them to have a factory in, maybe the second most expensive city in China, if not the most expensive city in China. Just rent is just going to outprice them, right? So so those are the main hubs. So like if you're talking about factories that deal with electronics, plastic products, textiles, but not just textiles, I mean mostly like clothing, things like that. Shoes, you're going to find them in southern China. You're going to find electronics in Shenzhen. You're going to find like the shoes and clothing in and around Guangzhou. Electronics, like I said, machinery, PVC, plastic, injection molding, all that stuff is generally in the Shenzhen, Foshan sort of area. And then another big thing is in southern China is, homewares, furniture, tiles, like, all that kind of stuff that is, all that kind of stuff that you use to, home decoration, the stuff that you use, home decor. So like I said, furniture, tiles, beddings, like all that stuff, you find them specifically in Foshan. Foshan probably has probably produces 80% of the tiles that everybody has, or couches that everybody has around the world. So that's what you're going to find in southern China. If you're talking about northern China, Ningbo is another city that's based in Zhejiang, and Ningbo does a lot of metal work, mostly northern China, you're going to find a lot of metal work, a lot of like sort of metal injection molding, anything to do with machinery, steel, like these kind of products are going to be stuff that you find like in Qingdao, Qingdao and Nantong specifically. All of the, you know, exercise equipment like CrossFit, all that stuff, like weights, barbells, dumbbells, it's made in Nantong and Qingdao. Like these are the areas that you're going to find that stuff. And then any other steel products, like cars, like car frames, things like that. That's what you're going to find in those parts of the country. But at the same time, in Jiangsu province, areas like Jinhua, that I mentioned before, they do a lot of the textiles in China. So in this time when I'm talking about textiles, I'm not talking about shoes and sort of clothing like jeans and stuff like that. I'm talking about, you know, cotton material beddings, you know, like you know, bed sheets, gloves, hats, bags, anything like that. Like that stuff is going to be done in that area. There's also EU is also part of that. So any sort of textiles, like that's where all the, you know, cotton and nylon, like these type of materials that are used for the stuff that I just mentioned, you're going to find in those kind of places. So that's usually that's kind of the main difference. And of course, this is from my own experience, and also a little bit of this is stuff that you can also find generally on the internet. But like me having been to a lot of these places, this is what I've seen. And then when I talk to factories, when we do research on factories, that's generally where those clusters lie. So just a quick recap. When we're talking about northern factories versus southern factories, southern China, Guangdong province, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Dongguan, Huizhou, Foshan, these are places where you're going to find electronics, plastic injection molding, some textiles like I said, shoes, things like that, toys, like anything along those lines. In terms of electronics, I mean, this is where Apple, this is where Samsung, all of these guys make their cell phones, all in Shenzhen area. All the tech that involves physical tech, like anything that's sort of IoT based, is going to be in southern China. And then, like I said, metal injection molding, things like that. That's stuff that you're going to find in Qingdao, in Nantong. So that's like Zhejiang, Jiangsu province. And then also the textiles, Jiangsu and Jiangsu province mainly, you're going to find textiles like beddings, you know, anything to do with nylon, cotton, gloves, like hats, whatever it is like that is involved with sort of, you know, textiles is going to be done there. And of course, textiles is shifting away from China just because it takes a lot of man hours to produce that stuff, and that's stuff that's being now outsourced to places like Thailand and Vietnam because the labor is much cheaper. But another thing I said to keep in mind is that when you're dealing with factories in northern China, it's going to be harder in terms of communication. They're going to need you to explain standards a bit more to them. They're going to need you to manage them a little bit closer. The benefits again are that it's cheaper to work with them. Sometimes the shipping is actually faster. So for example, if you're shipping from Shanghai, you know, Shanghai port, it's going to be much faster to go from Shanghai to LA by sea than it is going to be to go from Shenzhen or Hong Kong to LA by sea. So there's things like that. There's little small things that, you know, as you get into it, you'll understand a little bit better. With Qingdao's a little bit in a different position. So the Qingdao port it's you know, it's a little bit more inland. It's a little bit more west, I should say, sorry. And shipping from Qingdao takes a little bit longer. But like I said, there's a lot of good quality factories in Qingdao, and it's a hub for some of the things that I mentioned in terms of metalworks. So yeah, those are the main differences between, you know, dealing with northern factories, the sort of hubs that you find in China. And I will link up in the description, I'll link up some, you know, maps that you can look at that kind of have more descriptions, like that have a visual representation of some of the stuff that I'm talking about. And yeah, if you like this video, drop us a comment, subscribe, and please share it with some people. I'm trying to grow this channel. All right, cheers.